Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the inaugural SOF Team Room event, Legacy Beyond the Battlefield. My name is Dan Luna, and I'm a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, a certified leadership coach, and a doctoral student at University of Southern California. After 20 years of active duty service in the special operations community, the subjects on this agenda tonight are incredibly important to me. That's why I'm honored to be here today as the Master of Ceremonies for this event. We'll be together for the next 2 hours to talk about issues ranging from the impact of Afghanistan on our force to the way our service can affect our families and relationships. The format today is 2 short keynotes to open and close the event, panel sessions right next to those remarks, and in between those events, you can join some more informal breakout sessions that are focused on more specific topics and will be led by leaders from an assortment of special ops, nonprofits who are out there leading the charge. When in doubt, just stick to the event website and the agenda. Those will help you stay on track. Before we get into our first speaker, I do want to thank 3 sponsors who made this event possible. First off, the Charlie Daniels Journey Home Project, who are supporting as a SOF advocate sponsor. Then we have Worldwide Risk Management on board as a SOF support sponsor. And we also received a kind donation from Bill Pinmont. So thank you to him as well for just wanting to give to support the execution of this event. Huge thank you to all of those folks again, and to everyone who contributed to the content of this event. It's been a huge team effort, and I'm happy to see it coming together. One more note, there's a banner on the website for a SOF health survey for active duty and veteran SOF. We're trying to get as many responses as possible. If you're on active duty, it takes about 6 minutes. If you have transitioned from service, it will take you about 7 to 8 minutes, and that's it. Your participation is critical because it will help Global SOF Foundation know what issues are impacting community health, and then we will get support for those issues from cancer screenings to mental health care. So please find the link and take the survey. Share it with your commands and help us get as many responses as possible. That's enough for me. Now I'd like to introduce Command Sergeant Major retired Rick Lamb. Rick is the Director of Military Relations for the Global SOF Foundation. He's going to share a little bit about the meaning of this event and introduce the first panel. Rick, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Navy SEAL. Appreciate the introduction. Hey, as Dan said, I am Rick Lamb. I'm the Director of Military Relations for the Global SOF Foundation, and we're honored to help host this event tonight. I'd like to welcome everyone to this important and truly timely conversation. And no one can argue that we're living in some interesting, confusing, and increasingly volatile times. It seems like history, in fact, does repeat itself when you remain willfully ignorant of it. In 1974, the nation decided that the sacrifice of the warrior caste, fighting shoulder to shoulder with select allies and partners, was no longer worth the investment of our monetary capital. Snatching strategic defeat from the jaws of tactical victory in Vietnam, we saw 3 nations in Asia fall to communism in the vacuum left by our departure. The bloody purges that followed in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia cost the lives of some 5 million people, about 250,000 of them drowned at sea. Our failure to honor our commitment to the Paris Peace Accords prompted the president of South Vietnam to remark, "The Americans did not keep their word. Is an American word even reliable these days?" That severely hurt the men and women who fought and sacrificed in Vietnam. Now, I joined the Army as the siege and the fall of Saigon was still fresh in the minds of the Vietnam veterans who stepped up and trained my generation. The Vietnam veterans were some of the most switched on and professional soldiers I would ever serve with. Nothing like what was portrayed about them in the media and the movies of the day. The lessons I learned from soldiers like Grange, Record, Merck, Spencer, Guy, Booth, Kelly, Murphy, and countless others, I can honestly say made me a professional soldier and saved my life. And I don't say that lightly. Now, following Vietnam, this cadre of skilled soldiers rebuilt the professional military, stood up the Ranger Regiment, activated 5 active duty special forces groups with 2 more in the National Guard. They established the National Mission Force, the Joint Special Operations Command, and the United States Special Operations Command. Angry as many were, they kept their faith in the resiliency of America, her institutions, and her people. They found purpose in fixing the things that were broken. In the civilian sector, Vietnam veterans created successful companies like Nike, FedEx, and GoDaddy. They ran for office and became congressmen and cabinet secretaries. Now, I see the same spirit in the Afghanistan veterans of today with Black Rifle coffee, Grunt Style apparel, Three Rangers whiskey, and Horse Soldiers bourbon. I see veterans like Waltz, Crow, and Crenshaw being elected to Congress. I look forward to the changes and improvements that they will make in the military, politics, business, and academia. I would challenge each and every veteran to seek balance and continue to improve their perimeters by focusing on faith, family, fitness, friends, and finances. These 5 pillars provide a solid foundation, a firm backstop, and a lifeline. They provide the resilience that you need and that your extended tribe will almost certainly need in the coming years. Now, we found that you can lose 2 of the 5 and survive. If you lose 3 or more, you may not long endure. Now, we would urge teammates at every level to check themselves and each other against the 5 pillars using the same vigor you would apply to pre-mission combat checks. Now, for our first session tonight, Legacy Conversation Part 1, we have 2 moderators, Dr. Preston Cline and Dr. Chris Frueh, as well as 2 panelists, Lieutenant General retired Iron Mike Nagata and Command Sergeant Major retired Wild Bill Thetford. Thank you all for being here, gentlemen. Now, in the interest of time, I would just like to say hello, and then you guys take it from here.
Rick, Dan, thanks very much. My name is Dr. Preston Cline. I'll be one of the moderators today. I'm the director of the Mission Critical Team Institute, and I'm one of the primary authors on a paper called Residue that many of you might be familiar with. You'll hear from me more later, but right now I'd like to pass it over to my co-moderator, Chris Frueh, and hand it off to you to do some introductions.
Thanks, Preston. So my name is Chris Frueh. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been working with veterans and service members for 30 years now. And perhaps part of my claim to be here is I wrote a paper last year titled Operator Syndrome that we published in a medical journal, really just describing the types of medical and social challenges that the SOF community faces. So that's my introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Iron Mike.
Well, good evening or good day, everybody, wherever you happen to be. I'm Mike Nagata. I'll be very brief. I spent 38 years in the United States Army until leaving the military in 2019. 34 of those 38 years were all in Special Operations Forces. It was the adventure of a lifetime, and I'm delighted to be here today.
All right, I guess I'm going to follow General Nagata. Thanks, sir. Hey, much like General Nagata, I'm glad to be here. I'm Bill Thetford, and like Mike, I served 38 years, and about 34 of those were in SOF. So we have some numbers in common. I started off as a young ranger, great place for a young man to grow up, and then I spent some time in the special mission units, and then had the great opportunity to serve with a terrific leader, General Joe Votel in JSOC, SOCOM, and came out of the SOF closet and got to serve in CENTCOM. So that's kind of my brief history. But like General Nagata said, it's a real pleasure to be here with everyone tonight. So thank you.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started right into the questions. That's why you're all here. We'll start with you, Mike. And the question we have for you is now that you've had some time to think about the way that Afghanistan ended and your time in service over the last number of years, I won't say how many, I'm sure you've given some thought to both how it ended and your experiences and the impacts that it's had on you during that time. And with that, I'll just open it up to your thoughts.
Thanks very much. I doubt there's anyone on this call, whether they served in the military or not, who haven't been affected in some way by the tragedy that recently unfolded in South Asia. Personally, I doubt anyone will be surprised that the dominant reactions that I had were all emotional. The whole thing made me very sad. I got quite angry from time to time as I thought more and more about it. And I suppose I could make the argument I ought to be better than this, but yeah, I was bitter for a while. Maybe I still am to a small degree. I think I've gotten past that phase mostly. But for a time, I was quite bitter. More broadly, I was pretty depressed for a few days. I suspect that was a similar reaction by many who are on this conference call today. I did find some useful outlets for these emotions, though. And again, I suspect there are many people who are listening to this that found the same outlet. I found myself either being contacted by or reaching out to organizations or other actors who were doing what they could in whatever way they could find to help people get out of Afghanistan or support them once they got to wherever their destination was. That was a very useful outlet. It didn't take away all the sadness, all the anger, or even the bitterness, but it was a welcome pressure release valve, I should say. I probably would have been in a lot worse shape had I not found myself kind of consumed by those assisting activities. Not all of which worked. Some of them I suspect I'll never know if they worked, but while I certainly hope they did some good, they did some real good for me. The other reaction I had, though, is that as I look back, rather ironically, I think I was a little fortunate here in kind of a sad way, because there are people on this call, some of you that I'm looking at on the screen right now, including Bill Thetford, we'd actually seen this movie before. For those of us that did multiple combat rotations in Iraq, we all remember when the decision was made to go to zero in 2011. Now, of course, the immediate outcome there was not as instantaneously catastrophic as what happened in Afghanistan, but all of us knew that we were going to end up regretting going to zero in Iraq so precipitously. And if I'm honest with myself, as I try to remember what I felt back in those days, while not as vividly as I felt them after Afghanistan, in a way that was kind of a rehearsal for what I went through and what many people went through in Afghanistan. So the fact that I had seen the movie before also helped cushion the blow. Now, at the end of the day, I wouldn't call myself happy or over it or anything of the kind. You know, I continue to stew over this from time to time, although the urgency, the frequency, and the strength of, dwelling on this gradually is dissipating. Maybe in a few months from now, it'll be mostly gone, probably never go completely away.
Mike, thanks very much. I think what's poignant about that is that when you talk about things like anger, sadness, regret, depression, and the need to avoid dwelling on those things, that you pointed to being of service to something, to choose to go towards something to be of use. And I think that really matters. And with that, I'll pivot over to Bill and just say, do you have additional thoughts on your own experience on this and what was similar and what was different for you?
Yeah, thanks, Preston. Much like General Nagata said, and I'm sure everybody on this call, I'm disturbed by the pullout equally, because I believe it's like we forfeited all our invested national blood and treasure of the last 20 years. And I also feel sad for the Afghan people, especially the women and girls, because I don't see a bright future for them under Taliban rule. At the same time, with my multiple trips to Afghanistan over the years, I enjoyed seeing the growth of the professionalization of the Afghan SOF units. We knew early on we were not going to create clones of ourselves, but I did see progress, and I appreciated their persistence and their resolve. And I just think our total departure caught them by surprise, in that we weren't going to be there to back them up, to reinforce them when they needed it. And that caused them to lose their self-confidence. And so I wasn't surprised when, you had their complete downfall to the Taliban as fast as it came, because I don't think they were ever believed that we would completely pull out, that we would always have some sort of residual force there. So, as General Nagata said, we did see the pullout in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in 2010, 2011, which we all know how that worked out. We had to go back a few years later and kind of sort that out again. And then for some of us, I remember a similar kind of bitter pill in Somalia, Mogadishu in 1993, where, we went over there with Task Force Ranger with a distinct mission to go get Mohammed Farah Aidid, bring him to justice. That didn't work out. We absorbed a lot of casualties. And then we were told, hey, once you recover or rescue Michael Durant, you're done. You're coming home. And so that same feeling of, okay, what if the politicians set us up for this time? And yeah, I think it's understandable that guys and gals are angry after so much investment. And so I think this venue is a great way to kind of start trying to get through it.
Bill, thank you very much. Both you and Mike referenced sort of this, as Mike said, we've seen this movie before, right? So this sort of expectation reinforced where your own value system wasn't upheld, right? So this question of maybe moral injury, or some of the ways that people are talking about this, where the country's making decisions contrary to your personal values. And so as we think about that, and we think about the emotions associated with that, we do know that, and Chris will be able to speak to this more eloquently, looking back is not going to move us forward. We've got to look ahead. And so, Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to add to anything Bill had said, or to sort of go on to talk about sort of for you, what's next as you think about moving forward in your own career with your own sort of way of thinking about yourself and your work.
Thank you. All great questions. I guess I have a couple of reactions. Maybe the right, I'm anything but a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I think this is the right term. Coping mechanism. What I've discovered in the ensuing weeks since the withdrawal is that a couple of things are helping me cope. In fact, I think they're actually accelerating my ability to get, I'll never get completely past this, but to get over it enough that it's no longer, profoundly troubling me the way it was in the immediate aftermath. The first one is just an extension of what I mentioned earlier, or similar to what I mentioned earlier. I said a moment ago that I found some comfort in just trying to assist other people who were trying to get people out of Afghanistan. Similarly, I've turned a lot of my attention in the last month or so to trying to not help is probably the wrong word, trying to encourage people that I know in the SOF community, still on active duty, people that have transitioned out like Bill and I have, other benevolent organizations that do the kind of work that I'm trying to describe. Effectively communicate to as broad an audience of both active duty and transition special operators and personnel that we can, that they're not alone, and that they need someone to talk to. One of the most common conversations that I've had in the last few weeks, some of it's been deliberate, some of it's kind of been accidental, and I've just run into people that I know from the SOF community. I try to find a way in the conversation, ask them, so, do you have anybody you can talk to about this? You're obviously just like me. You're frustrated. You're a little angry, probably a little depressed like I am. I try to give us some examples of who I've found to talk to. I try to encourage them to do it too. Now, of course, just talking to somebody about something awful like Afghanistan doesn't solve every problem a person may have, but it damn sure helps. Keeping it to yourself, I know from hard experience, is the worst thing you can do. Of all the choices you can make, that's probably about the worst one you can make, is just keep it bottled up inside and not let it out. Some people don't want to do it. I don't know. Maybe they feel like maybe they think it's a sign of weakness, or they're afraid they're going to come across as grumbling or griping. It is what I've been trying to communicate to people is that you need to do it. You need to find an outlet. And what I try to tell them is it has certainly helped me. The more I can talk to people about this, who actually understand what I'm talking about, and everybody in the SOF community understands what I'm talking about here, the better I have been. I like to think I've helped them, but it's also been therapeutic for me. The only thing I'll mention, and I'll be very brief about this, is that to the degree I can, as a retired military officer, I live in Washington, D.C. these days. I try to find a way in think tanks and other activities that I do to communicate. I even teach a class where I mentioned this recently in a class for the Joint Special Operations University. And this may sound, I don't know, this may sound a little fatalistic, but what I'm trying to communicate to people is this is the deal. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines aren't policymakers. Even I, as a flag officer, I was not a policymaker. We implement policy. We implement strategy. If you're going to spend a career in service to your country, your service to your country has to be faithful no matter what happens with the decision-making of your country. This is the deal you signed up for. It's easy to forget. That doesn't mean I don't have a right to be angry. That doesn't mean I don't have a right to be frustrated. That doesn't mean I don't have a right to disagree. But I do remind myself, and I try to remind other people, whether we like it or not, this is the deal. And rather oddly, I have found that has helped me to remind myself of that. Thanks for asking.
If I could chime in, maybe Bill, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the physical and emotional ways in which you've been affected throughout the course of your service. Maybe kind of segue from there into also kind of what you've seen in the community and what other people might be struggling with.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Chris. The frustration level is going to be incredibly high right now. General Nagata touched on a lot of good points in terms of coping, and for me, as I was thinking about what happened, not just with Afghanistan, but Iraq and in Somalia, is I remember the great friendships, the great teammates I had. I remember the successes we had. We know we had successes. No politician, no policy will ever take those away from us. And so, as General Nagata said, you got to cope with it and look forward. And for me, it's that's finding someone to talk to. Make sure that you have a sounding board wherever that may be. I stay up. I like to exercise. I've never gotten away from it. So to me, it's that routine of my exercise in the morning. I have a great wife, a great supporting wife who's equally patriotic and as frustrated as I am. So we can sit down together and talk and solve many of the world's problems if that's what we need to do. And it's just talking it out, and don't try to solve it yourself. Never feel like you've got to sit in the closet and kind of just soak it up. I think we've got great resources. Even before I left, our POTIF, I think now we're calling it Human Performance and Wellness. So there's some great resources out there. I always felt like I had great chaplains and psychologists that were easy to talk to, very approachable, to just go by and talk to them. And I would encourage everybody to do that and just try to take care of yourselves, and don't let this one, as saddening as this event is, don't let it get you down.
Maybe I could ask Preston a question here. You're the author of the residue paper. Yep. Maybe you could give us a one or two sentences description of what that paper is about, and then we can bring that into the conversation.
It's actually references what Mike said, and it's this idea of sort of this radical pragmatism, which is it is what it is. You all chose a hard path. You made the decision to choose this path, and it isn't the one that you get to chart every decision. It's you're navigating extreme uncertainty, and with that comes challenges, but there are ways sustainably and successfully navigate those ways. And one of the things that and I really actually, Chris, I'm actually going to pivot back to Mike, not to dodge this, but I am curious for both Bill and Mike. Both of you are married. I've been married 21 years. Mike, you spoke about isolation, right? And this idea of the danger of people becoming isolated. In my former world, the world I used to live in, we used to have this expression, which is that there's never one fatality and there's never one loss. There's always one fatality followed by dead marriages and dead careers and dead dreams, right? And this idea that you pointed out, which is we may not be able to affect the original loss, the loss of Afghanistan, but we can certainly affect all the follow-on losses that happen. But to do that, we have to break out of our own isolation. So with that as a tee up, Mike, I'd just love to hear your thoughts, and Bill as well.
Boy, I almost don't know where to start. The interplay between my professional life, which, like pretty much everybody in the SOF community for the last 20 years, has been more often abroad than at home. Or as my wife likes to tell me, even when you were here, you weren't here. Your mind was away, no matter whether you were home or not. And she's right about that. But the interplay between my family life and my professional life is something that I still ponder to this day. I mean, I don't deploy anywhere anymore except to the grocery store or on a mission to Home Depot from my wife. But I still muse over this. What was the nature of that back and forth between my family life and my professional life? And overall, was it a good thing, a bad thing? Does it end up being a draw? I really don't know. But to get back to your question, here's what I do know. A significant portion of my ability to do the things that my various commands and assignments required of me were highly dependent on whether or not I knew that my family was okay at home. Anytime there was trouble in my family back home, just the guilt alone that I wasn't there to help them deal with it made me less effective operationally. I can claim it had no effect. I can claim I could compartment it. That's BS. I did not compartment it. I was unsuccessful in compartmenting it. It had an effect. Conversely, I know that my family's experience of my constant deployments and operational life was also a mixed bag. They are very proud of the service that I gave, but I'll never know what my relationship with my family, both my wife and my children, might have been had I not been away from them for so long, so often. That's an unknowable proposition, but it would have been different. And I think there's a fair chance it would have been better. There's a fair chance. Not that I don't have a great relationship with my wife and my kids, I do, but it came at a cost. So again, getting back to your question, I don't have a mathematical outcome to express. I really don't know fully, even after all these years, what that interplay cost either side of this relationship, but all of it came at a cost.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, sure. You know, what I would tell you is what I'm most proud of is how we have kind of brought our families into the community in SOF. I can remember as a young NCO in SOF where, you know, the command climate was almost one of, hey, your family is your responsibility, not the commands. And, you know, your wives will know what they need to know when they need to know it. And then we took those hard losses in Somalia. And I think we figured out real quick that we need to do better for our families. And then watching the family readiness programs improve and bring families into POTF so that we could, you know, integrate our families and give us outlets together and not just take care of the service member, because that's really kind of a one-dimensional way to look at it, but include the families as much as we could. And the scene where we are now compared to, 25, 30 years ago, and how we cared for our families, I think has come a long way. And certainly those programs have no doubt saved a lot of careers and a lot of marriages.
We're closing in on the last few minutes before we take a break to start heading towards the individual sessions. And what I would like to do is that I know Mike and Bill, you've given a lot of thought to this over the last few weeks, and our questions are meant to provoke things, but what are some things that we have not asked that are top of mind for you, that if you think about the audience and who's out there right now, the things that you want to make sure that you have a chance to say? Now, Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I can do this very quickly. I think the question that everyone in the special operations world ought to be discussing, both service members and families, is a question that I already know the answer to. Are we going to be less busy in the future? The answer is no. The answer is no. Anybody who thinks that the deployment tempo and the pressure is going to ease off in coming years because we're not in Afghanistan or Iraq anymore, I don't know whether this makes you happy or sad, but SOF is going to be this kind of crazy busy for the rest of forever because we are indispensable.
Yeah, I think General Nagata, you hit it right on the head there. I mean, we always used to say on deployments, the enemy gets a vote, and so we can think, oh, this is it. We're kind of on timeout now, but I wouldn't put much money on that, and I would just, as you said earlier, sir, don't worry about the stigma. We've got to get guys and gals comfortable talking, and don't worry about it. It's not going to sidetrack your career. I certainly am not going to call you a sissy because you feel like you need to go talk to someone. So please, go out there and engage others and find a sounding board.
It's a great segue to actually introduce Chris's work on operator syndrome. And I'll start it by saying that in the I don't know, 15 years of working with the teams around the world, I will tell you that whenever I speak to somebody on the side and I say, hey, look, I'm looking at the suicide rates, the depression rates, the alcoholism, substance use rates, the divorce rates, and I'm worried about you. And they always look at me and they go, oh, I'm different. It won't hit that. I have figured out a special way. And I look, really? Because all the people I'm staring at look a lot like you and they don't seem to have a special way. Their special way doesn't seem to be working. And so I say that by saying that there's a level of group denial here about seeing mental health as just performance, the same as you'd go to a coach or a physical therapist or anything else. And I think one of the things that's been really helpful in the community is Chris's work by being able to label some of the things just to keep an eye out for. And with that, Chris, I'll just go over to you, and then we'll end with Mike and Bill and pass it over to Dane.
Thank you, Preston. I guess what I would add to what you just said is the point, and Mike made this very effectively about the value of talking to somebody, and the value of talking to somebody who you can trust and relate to, and that can be hard to find. But what I would say about what I and many others are talking about is calling operator syndrome, is that it's a framework for understanding sort of this whole large picture of pathophysiological injuries. So I don't start with the idea that there's mental illness or psychiatric problems. I start with the idea that there's these cellular injuries in the brain, in the lungs, in the hormonal functioning of the SOF service members. And all of those things then tie into pain, sleep, substance use, anger, depression, PTSD, maybe, and on and on. So I always start with the pathophysiological injuries. And I think for me, I've found that that's something that resonates with a lot of guys, because it's fairly easy to understand that the law of physics simply says if you're standing next to a blast, it's going to injure your head. And then there's a cascade of things that come from that. So with that, I'll pass it over to General Nagata and let him and Bill have the last word before we go to break.
Well, thank you. As I've said earlier, I have no professional training in the mental health sciences or anything remotely like it. But about a year before I retired, the Army was running a health assessment for senior officers. One of the best things the Army's ever did for me, by the way. Anyways, during this process, I had 2 sessions with an Army psychiatrist. And at the end of the program, she did an outbrief with me. And here's what she told me. She said, okay, General Nagata, the good news is you're not sick. But then she kind of leaned into me and she said, but don't assume that means you're well. You have trouble sleeping. There's some things you still haven't gotten past. So be glad you're not sick. Be glad I'm not going to prescribe anything for you, but you do need to get better. And that was a distinction I'd never thought of before. And I still hold to it to this day, and I'm still working on getting better.
I think we're just at time, but Bill, I want to give you a second to say anything if you want to, before we pass it back over to Dan.
I'm just going to say to me, the full complement of performance, the POTF people, the strength trainers, nutritionists, psychologists that work together to get that whole person wellness that General Nagata just spoke to. So if the physical trainer sees a drop in performance, he can pass that information on to the other members of the POTF team so that they can come up with, a consolidated plan. And I think that's working well.
Fantastic. Mike, Bill, Chris, thank you very much for being part of this. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dan.
Powerful conversation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. And I look forward to what you have to say at the end of the event after these wellness sprints. Speaking of, we'll now have a very short break to transition to session A of the wellness sprint workshops. So all you have to do is scroll down on this webpage to view the agenda, and you should see session A with 3 different sprints listed. Each sprint will happen in a Zoom and focus on issues critical to SOF. They'll only last about 20 minutes, and each is led by members of a key special ops organization or program. After session A, we'll switch to new Zooms for session B and focus on new topics. So check out the agenda and see which one you think will be most meaningful to you. At 20:30 Eastern, we'll all come back to this page to participate in part 2 of the legacy conversation. So make sure you bookmark the Team Room page, and I'll see you back here in an hour.